Tom Hardy came looking for his grandfather's movies. Instead, he found something that made him question whether the man who raised him was a hero or a monster. The narrow staircase creaked under his weight as he descended into the basement of Goldstein Archives. Dust particles danced in the pale afternoon light, filtering through grimy windows, and the air carried the musty scent of deteriorating film stock and forgotten memories. Tom adjusted his leather jacket, his dark eyes scanning the endless rows of metal shelving that stretched into shadows. He had been searching for these films for 3 years. His grandfather, Edward Hardy, had been a pioneering cinematographer in the 1940s, but his work had vanished after the war. Family legend painted Edward as a visionary, a man who documented the liberation of Europe with unprecedented artistry. These weren't just films to Tom. They were a legacy, a connection to the grandfather who had died when Tom was barely 5. "Mr. Hardy," a voice called from the depths of the archive. Tom turned toward the sound, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. Between towering shelves emerged a small, elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses and a pristine white beard. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone handling precious artifacts. "Samuel Goldstein," the man said, extending a weathered hand. "Welcome to my collection." Tom clasped the offered hand, noting the firm grip despite the man's age. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Goldstein. I know my request was unusual." Goldstein's pale blue eyes studied Tom with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Unusual, yes. Your grandfather's work, it's not something I expected anyone to come looking for." There was something in Goldstein's tone, a hesitation that Tom couldn't quite place. He followed the archivist deeper into the basement, past shelves lined with film canisters bearing dates from the 1920s through the 1980s. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. "You said you had several reels," Tom prompted, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and reverence. "I'm willing to pay whatever you think is fair. These films, they're all I have left of him." Goldstein stopped abruptly, his hand resting on a particular shelf. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken weight. When he finally turned, his expression had changed, the polite professionalism replaced by something Tom couldn't identify. Was it sadness? Anger? "Mr. Hardy," Goldstein said slowly, "before we proceed, I need to ask you something. What exactly did your family tell you about your grandfather's work during the war?" The question caught Tom off guard. He was a cinematographer. He documented the liberation of concentration camps, helped expose what happened there. "My father always said Edward was a hero, that his films helped bring justice." Goldstein nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Tom's face. "And you believe that?" "Of course I believe it," Tom replied, his voice carrying a note of defensiveness. "Why wouldn't I?" The old man reached up and pulled down a metal canister, cradling it like it contained something fragile and dangerous. "Because, Mr. Hardy, sometimes the stories families tell themselves are the ones they need to survive." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. There was something prophetic in Goldstein's words, something that suggested this simple transaction was about to become anything but simple. "I think," Goldstein continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "you should see what your grandfather really filmed." The film canister felt heavier than it should have as Goldstein carried it to an old editing table in the corner of the basement. Tom followed, his heart rate increasing with each step. The fluorescent light above the table flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the equipment. "Mr. Goldstein," Tom began, his voice strained, "you're making me nervous. If there's something wrong with the films, just tell me." Goldstein carefully threaded the film through an ancient projector, his movements precise despite his trembling hands. "Wrong is a complicated word, Mr. Hardy. Your grandfather's films are technically magnificent. The composition, the lighting, extraordinary craftsmanship." Tom leaned against the table, watching the old man work. But the subjects." Goldstein paused, his finger hovering over the projector's power switch. "Tell me, what do you know about Mauthausen?" The name sent a jolt through Tom's memory. "The concentration camp. My grandfather filmed there after liberation. He showed the world what happened." Goldstein's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Liberation. Yes, that's what the family story says." He turned to face Tom fully, his eyes now blazing with an intensity that made Tom step back. "Mr. Hardy, your grandfather didn't film the liberation of Mauthausen. He filmed during its operation." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Tom felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. You're mistaken." "Am I?" Goldstein's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Your grandfather wasn't a liberator, Mr. Hardy. He was a collaborator." Tom's hands clenched into fists. "You're lying. My grandfather was a hero." He what?" Goldstein interrupted, his voice rising. "He told your family bedtime stories about justice and liberation, while the truth rotted in storage for 70 years? The projector hummed to life, and grainy black and white images began flickering on the wall. Tom's breath caught in his throat. The footage was indeed professionally shot, steady camera work, perfect framing. But what it showed made his stomach turn. German officers directing prisoners, close-ups of emaciated faces filled with terror, and in the reflection of a window, barely visible but unmistakably there, was the shadow of the cameraman, methodically documenting horrors for posterity. "Stop," Tom whispered, but Goldstein didn't move toward the projector. "This is what your grandfather really did," Goldstein continued relentlessly. "He wasn't exposing the camps, Mr. Hardy. He was hired by the SS to document their efficiency. These films were meant to be training materials." Tom lunged forward and switched off the projector himself, plunging the corner back into dim fluorescent lighting. His hands were shaking. "You're sick. You're trying to destroy my family's memory for what? Money?" Goldstein's expression softened slightly, but his resolve didn't waver. "I'm trying to tell you the truth, something my family never got." "Your family?" Tom spun around, his voice dangerous now. "What does your family have to do with any of this?" The old man walked slowly to another shelf, pulling down a different canister. This one was smaller, more recent. "My father was at Mauthausen, Mr. Hardy. Prisoner number 73,691. He survived barely, and when the Americans finally did liberate the camp, they found your grandfather's equipment still there." Tom felt the room spinning around him. No, that's not. My grandfather helped expose the Holocaust. He was on the right side." "Was he?" Goldstein's voice was quietly devastating. "Or did your family just tell themselves that story because the truth was too heavy to carry?" The silence stretched between them, thick with decades of buried pain. Tom's mind raced, trying to reconcile everything he'd believed with what he was hearing. Even if what you're saying is true, why would you have these films? Why keep them?" Goldstein's smile was sad, weighted with history. "Because someone has to remember. Not the convenient version, Mr. Hardy. The real version." Tom's anger erupted. "So what is this? Some kind of revenge? You lure me here to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family?" "I didn't lure you anywhere," Goldstein replied calmly. "You came looking for your grandfather's work. I'm simply showing it to you." "This is insane." Tom began pacing the small space, his hands running through his hair. "My father told me stories. My whole family. Your family protected you," Goldstein interrupted, "just like mine protected me from knowing that the man who filmed my father's suffering went on to live a comfortable life in England, raising children who grew up believing he was a hero." Tom stopped pacing, turning to face the archivist. "How do you know my grandfather went to England? How do you know any of this?" Goldstein reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph. "Because after the war, my father spent 40 years tracking down everyone involved. Your grandfather's name was in the SS files. Edward Hardy, cinematographer, hired for special documentation projects." He handed Tom the photograph. It showed a group of German officers standing outside a building Tom didn't recognize. In the background, barely visible, stood a man with a camera. The face was unclear, but something about the posture, the way he held himself. "That could be anyone," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Could it?" Goldstein pulled out another photograph, this one clearer. It showed the same man without his camera, talking to an SS officer. The face was visible now, and Tom's world tilted on its axis. It was unmistakably his grandfather. Tom dropped the photograph as if it burned him. "This proves nothing. Maybe he was forced to..." "Forced?" Goldstein's voice was incredulous. "Mr. Hardy, your grandfather wasn't a prisoner. He was paid. Handsomely. The records show he completed 7 different assignments for the SS before disappearing in 1945. Tom's legs felt weak. He leaned against the editing table, his mind struggling to process the information. Everything he'd believed, every story his father had told him, every source of pride in his family's history, it was all crumbling. "Why are you telling me this?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible. Goldstein sat down heavily in an old chair, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. "Because lies have weight, Mr. Hardy. They accumulate over decades, crushing the people who carry them and the people who deserve the truth." Tom looked up, his eyes blazing with renewed anger. "So, what do you want? An apology? Money? Public humiliation?" "I want acknowledgement. Goldstein said simply. "I want someone from your family to admit what really happened. My father died believing that the world had forgotten what was done to him. He never knew that the man who filmed his suffering became a respected member of English society." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Tom stared at the scattered photographs, at the film canisters, at the evidence of a truth he'd never wanted to discover. "My father," Tom began, then stopped. "Does my father know?" Goldstein's expression was unreadable. "What do you think?" Tom's mind raced through memories. His father's reluctance to discuss the grandfather's work in detail, the vague stories, the way conversations change whenever Tom asked specific questions. The signs had been there, but he'd been too eager to believe the heroic narrative to notice them. "He knows," Tom whispered. "The question now," Goldstein said gently, "is what you're going to do with this knowledge." Tom looked up, his face a mask of confusion and pain. "What can I do? My grandfather's been dead for 30 years. The victims are mostly gone. What's the point of destroying his memory now?" Goldstein stood slowly, walking to where Tom sat. "The point, Mr. Hardy, is that some truths are too important to stay buried. Your grandfather's actions helped document some of humanity's darkest moments. Not to expose them, but to celebrate them. That truth doesn't belong to your family anymore. It belongs to history." Tom Hardy sat in his car, outside the Goldstein archives for nearly an hour, staring at the building that had just dismantled his family's mythology. The weight of the truth pressed down on him like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe. In his hands, he held copies of documents that Goldstein had insisted he take, evidence that would forever change how he understood his grandfather's legacy. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. "How did the archive visit go? Find anything interesting about Grandpa Edward?" Tom stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The casual nature of the question now felt loaded, almost mocking. His father knew. He had to know. The careful way the family had always spoken about Edward's work, the vague timelines, the missing details, it all made sense now. Instead of responding, Tom called. "Dad." His voice was steady, but cold. "Tom, how wonderful. Did you find grandfather's films?" "I found them." Tom paused, watching people walk past his car, going about their normal lives while his world had fundamentally shifted. "Dad, we need to talk about what really happened during the war." The silence on the other end stretched too long. When his father finally spoke, his voice had changed. "Tom, I think you should come home." "You knew?" It wasn't a question. Another pause. "Some truths are too heavy for one generation to carry alone, son. We hoped they would die with us." Tom closed his eyes, feeling a mixture of betrayal and understanding wash over him. "Mr. Goldstein lost his father in Mauthausen, Dad. Grandfather filmed there. For the SS. I know." The words were barely a whisper. Tom ended the call without saying goodbye. 6 months later, Tom Hardy stood before a congressional committee on Holocaust remembrance. The chamber was packed with reporters, historians, and survivors' families. In the front row sat Samuel Goldstein, his presence both a support and a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. "My grandfather, Edward Hardy, was not the man our family believed him to be," Tom began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "For 70 years, we carried a lie. Today, I want to help carry the truth." The statement he read detailed everything. His grandfather's collaboration, the family's complicity in maintaining the false narrative, and his commitment to ensuring the real history was properly documented. It wasn't easy. The media attention was brutal, and several family members stopped speaking to him entirely. But as Tom watched Samuel Goldstein's face during his testimony, he saw something he'd never expected to see: peace. The old man's shoulders seemed lighter, as if a burden he'd carried for decades was finally being shared. After the hearing, Tom and Samuel walked out of the building together. "Thank you," Samuel said simply. Tom nodded, understanding that some acknowledgments transcend words. "What happens to the films now?" "They go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum," Samuel replied, "where they belong, as evidence, not entertainment." Tom looked up at the sky, clear and blue despite the weight of the day. "I used to think family honor was about protecting the past. Now, I think it's about confronting it." Samuel smiled, the first genuine smile Tom had seen from him. "Your grandfather may have been lost to darkness, Mr. Hardy, but you chose the light." As they parted ways, Tom realized that sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do isn't defending their family's legacy. It's deciding which legacy truly deserves to survive. The truth he had learned was worth more than comfort, and some discoveries, no matter how painful, set both the living and the dead free. 1 year after the congressional hearing, Tom Hardy received an unexpected call. He was on set in Prague, filming his latest project, when his assistant approached with a serious expression. "Tom, there's a call for you. It's Samuel Goldstein." Tom felt his stomach tighten. Since the hearing, they had exchanged occasional emails, but Goldstein rarely called. When he did, it usually meant something significant. "Samuel," Tom answered, stepping away from the crew. "Is everything all right?" "Mr. Hardy, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a year ago." Tom's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "There's more to the story. About your grandfather." Samuel's voice carried a weight that Tom had learned to recognize. "I've been debating whether to burden you with this, but I think you deserve to know everything." Tom found himself sitting down heavily on a nearby chair. "What kind of more? My father? Before he died, he told me something about your grandfather that I never included in our conversations. Something that changes the narrative." Tom's hands were shaking. "Samuel, please. Just tell me. Your grandfather didn't just document the horrors, Tom. In 1944, he secretly filmed evidence of specific SS officers committing war crimes. He hid these films, thinking someday they could be used for justice." The words hit Tom like a physical blow, but in reverse. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your grandfather was playing a double game. Yes, he worked for the SS, but he was also secretly documenting evidence against them. My father saw him hiding film canisters, saw him marking them with special symbols." Tom felt the world spinning again, but this time in a different direction. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Samuel's voice was heavy with regret. "Because I was angry. My father suffered, and I needed someone to blame. When you came looking for those films, I saw an opportunity to make someone pay for what happened to my family." "You lied to me." Tom's voice was flat, emotionless. "I didn't lie. Everything I showed you was true, but I didn't show you everything. There were other canisters, other films that showed your grandfather's real purpose." Tom stood up, pacing the narrow space of his trailer. "Do you have any idea what you put me through? What I've put my family through? I know, and I'm sorry. But Tom, the truth is more complicated than either of us wanted to admit. Your grandfather was both a collaborator and a resistance fighter. He worked within the system to document evidence that helped convict dozens of war criminals after the war. The silence stretched between them. Tom's mind raced through the implications. The congressional hearing, the media attention, the family relationships he'd destroyed, all based on an incomplete picture. "Why are you telling me this now?" Tom asked finally. "Because last month, construction workers found a buried cache of film canisters in the basement of what used to be Mauthausen. They were marked with the same symbols my father remembered. Your grandfather's hidden evidence." Tom felt tears he hadn't expected. "What do I do with this, Samuel?" "You do what you think is right. But this time, you have the complete story." After hanging up, Tom sat in silence for a long time. The truth, he realized, was never simple. His grandfather had been neither pure hero nor pure villain, but something far more complex. A man who had navigated impossible circumstances and made choices that defied easy categorization. Sometimes, Tom thought, the most important discoveries were the ones that reminded you that people, even your heroes, were neither saints nor monsters, but simply human beings trying to survive impossible situations, while holding on to whatever pieces of their souls they could save.